guys, it's Danny and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Yay! So the premise of today's video is judgment and how being judgmental is the number one thing holding you back from all that you desire. In order to properly get into our topic today, we have to discuss the difference between judgment and discernment. So I define judgment as making decisions or evaluations of other people or yourself in a way that is polarizing. So that means you're deeming things as either good or bad. Whereas discernment is the ability to make decisions or evaluations from a neutral or objective place. So when we think about judging others, that's rarely looked at in a positive light. Usually judging someone or something involves determining whether that thing is good or bad, or worthy or unworthy. Whereas discernment is determining what is right or wrong for you in this now moment, or what is or isn't aligned to your highest good. Meaning that if you understand that something is right or wrong for you, you will not assume that that is the totality of what that thing is. So for example, if your discernment tells you that drinking alcohol is bad for you, you're not going to immediately assume that someone else who is drinking alcohol is doing something that's bad for them. Whereas if you were to judge, then since you have deemed alcohol as bad, when someone else drinks, you would see that action in a negative light, as opposed to seeing it objectively as to how that substance impacts or interacts with that other person. So, how does judgment block you? How does judgment prevent you from reaching your manifestations? So, let's start off with talking about judging others. Let's say you're in a class of students and there's one student that raises their hand for every question and they're kind of deemed the teacher's pet. You and likely your fellow classmates call this other student annoying, with the implication that because this person is annoying, they are somehow less worthy. Their perceived value is diminished because of this trait. This by nature often leads to gossiping. And gossiping certainly feels good in the moment, because by your peers agreeing with your evaluation, your judgment feels validated. But what this ultimately results in is devaluing yourself. Because if you perceive yourself to have any of these traits that you are judging the other person for possessing, then that leads you to perceive that your worth is also diminished in the way that you are unconsciously diminishing this other person's worth. So what happens when we embody traits that we judge in others? This can lead us down one of two roads primarily. One, you suppress the traits that you perceive as bad or unworthy. Or two, you make excuses for why it's okay that you have these traits but not for other people. When we judge, we write off traits. We put it in a box of either good or bad or And what happens when we write off traits and just put them in boxes is we deny ourselves the opportunity to learn from these traits. So in the example of the teacher's pet, you perceive them as annoying, you perceive them as an attention hog, or even arrogant. So even when you want to raise your hand and give the right answer, you don't, because of the fact that you don't want to be perceived that way. Because your social group or culture or family or whatever it may be unconsciously tells you that that trait is bad. That being the teacher's pet will lead to you not being accepted by your peers. On the other hand, if you excuse when you act the same as this other student, when you try to find other reasons to justify why it's okay that you possess these qualities but not this other student, you deny the opportunity to reflect. You deny the opportunity to properly discern whether it's in alignment with you to possess these traits and to better understand why you're judging this other person. So you're writing off the opportunity to grow. When it really comes down to it, judging others is the same as judging yourself, even when it doesn't feel like it or seem like it. When we so harshly judge others, even if we fail to meet ourselves with that same level of judgment, you're in a state of denial. You're insecure about your human nature deep down, and the only way that you feel safe being able to reflect on those traits that you perceive as negative is projecting that insecurity onto another person. And on the flip side, let's say you're not particularly judgmental of others, you focus that judgment inwards. What we need to understand is even though physically you are treating judgment differently, energetically in the eyes of the universe or in the eyes of all that is, it's the same thing. And as a person who for her whole life has primarily focused her judgment inwards, not saying I haven't judged other people, that certainly has occurred. I kind of developed the belief that by judging myself, I wasn't hurting anybody else because I wasn't projecting my insecurities onto others. I wasn't trying to make other people feel bad for possessing certain traits. I wasn't consistently talking shit about people behind their back, even though I still did it. So I felt like me judging myself wasn't as bad because it didn't have a profound negative impact on the people around me. But in reality, being so judgmental of yourself sends a message to the people around you that if they possess the trait that you judge yourself for, that their inherent worth is also diminished. Let's use an example. Let's say there's a mom and she has a daughter. The mom is very harsh on her own appearance. The mom is constantly calling herself ugly or saying that her body isn't beautiful, looking at herself in the mirror and judging the way she looks and trying to make herself look a certain way in order to feel loved and accepted. The mom tells the daughter that the daughter is beautiful, that she's worthy, that she's loved. But because the daughter sees the mom judging her physical appearance so harshly, when the daughter sees that she may possess some of the traits that her mom possesses, she picks up on the fact that her mom is judging herself, so then she then inherits that insecurity. She starts to become hypercritical of her own appearance. So even though her mom never judged her for the way she looked, even though her mom tried to reassure her that she is beautiful and that she is worthy, the daughter has a hard time believing it because that's not the attitude that she sees reflected in her environment. So even though the daughter didn't grow up in an environment where she was outwardly judged or made to feel like she was less than, she starts to develop belief systems as if she was judged or as if she was told that her body or her face isn't beautiful. That is the energy that the daughter grew up seeing and therefore absorbing. What we don't realize as the person who is hypercritical of ourselves and tries to be as nice as possible to the people around us is our internalized judgment is vibrationally the same as externalized judgment. And for the most part, it affects the people around us very similarly, if not the same. As I said before, judgment is always putting people or things or traits into boxes. We deem it as good or bad, or we label it. And what happens when we do that is we refuse ourselves the opportunity to examine that thing or that person outside of that lens or that label that we've put onto it. And this limits our ability to objectively perceive this thing that we are judging. It's very important to become aware of where judgment meets jealousy and how these two things work together. Oftentimes when we judge someone that we're jealous of, we'll say or think things like, they don't deserve it. Why do they have it? Why don't I have it? What am I doing wrong? When we condemn others for having what we want, we're sending a mixed message to the universe. We're telling the universe, okay, I want this thing. I want to be this kind of person. I want to embody this kind of energy. But when you question whether you are deserving of this thing, or when you question whether someone else is worthy of this thing, you're telling the universe that you don't deserve it. And so your reality is going to reflect that belief system back to you. Now, again, if you feel jealous, I don't want you to feel ashamed or bad about the fact that you are experiencing that feeling. Instead, use jealousy as an opportunity to reflect. Because if you are desiring something, someone else possessing that thing that you want to have doesn't mean that you're less likely to achieve it. It means, oh, if this person can do it, then I can do it. So if you're jealous from your friend in high school having 10,000 followers, and you're like, why don't I have 10,000 followers? You are pushing that reality away because you're telling the universe that it's bad that they have this many followers, or they don't deserve it. So therefore the universe wouldn't reward you with that if you are in the belief that that makes you arrogant or whatever you may deem that to be. Whereas if you look at this other person obtaining this number of followers as evidence that you are able to achieve that as well, then instead of energetically using someone else's success as a means to block your manifestation, you use it as an opportunity to actually accelerate your manifestation, because their success indicates to me that it's possible. So, in the lens of judgment, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, well, what about people who've done truly despicable things? Like, I understand not judging the teacher's pet or forgiving myself for doing things that may have not been aligned to my highest good. But what about people who incited mass genocide? Or what about people who get pleasure out of hurting others? Do we just not judge them? Do we just excuse those actions? Here's the way I look at it. It is not by any means excusing someone's actions. And it is certainly not about invalidating the horrible repercussions that came as a result of, quite frankly, evil actions that someone may have taken. But when we write off someone as a bad person, or when we write off someone as an evil soul, like the way that many Hollywood movies have taught us to perceive the villains, we overlook the opportunity to learn. We have to ask ourselves, what must have happened to that person or to that soul to make them feel like mass genocide was okay or necessary? What experiences did that person go through to lead them to that conclusion? What beliefs did that person develop that made them capable of such heinous or despicable action? When we just simply write off these actions, when we simply just say that that person was evil, then we don't learn why that happened. So we become incapable of correcting that pattern, and so history repeats itself. But if we start to understand the psychology of these people, and using our discernment instead of our judgment, using our ability to determine how their psychology came to be, instead of so quickly putting them in a box and shaming them for their actions, then the same pattern is going to repeat over and over and over again. And I'm not telling you that people who have taken awful, despicable actions are worthy of your respect. But from my perspective, projecting shame onto a specific type of archetype prevents us from seeing the villain that we possess within. So when we completely reject or write off a certain person, we become less conscious. We choose to be unconscious because it's easier to hate that person. It's easy to say that they're just evil because then we don't have to understand. We don't have to empathize with someone who is capable of such disgusting behavior. And if you don't want to let go of judgment, that is fine. You have the right to take or leave anything that I say in this video, or any of my videos for that matter. But I urge you to look beyond the surface. Instead of being able to learn and discern, we take the easy way out. We judge and we shame and we chastise, which doesn't do anything other than force people to suppress who they really are. And you may say, well, if that's killing people, that's a good thing. And you're not wrong, but when we suppress something, it doesn't go away. It's just hidden. And what remains in the dark ultimately has more power over us. So if someone is insecure about the fact that they don't have a lot of money and they perceive a certain group or a certain archetype to have that money, their hatred bubbles up inside of them towards that person or towards that group or towards that archetype because they're unable to address that feeling of lack within themselves. So the more transparent we become, the easier it is for others to become transparent about the things that they deem as bad or society deems as bad. What if when we were thinking about racism, instead of treating the person who is very prejudiced as a bad person, we seek to understand what they are insecure with within themselves that they are projecting onto another group? Because I guarantee you, anybody that is conscious, anybody that is aware of their blind spots or aware that they have blind spots is not just going to be hating or abusing others for possessing a trait that is out of their control or abusing others, period. That doesn't come from a place of authentically who you are. That comes from an unconscious place. That comes from a place of fear and a place of lack. And if we were to see that, if we were to see that the most despicable acts come from that place of fear, we can learn how to restructure ourselves and ultimately restructure society so that those unconscious behaviors come into the light and therefore are no longer unconscious. and therefore will eliminate a lot of human suffering and a lot of hate. So how is judgment the number one thing holding us back? Judgment limits us. It limits our perception. It writes things off as good or bad. So the things we perceive as good, we don't see what detriments it could really have to us or the people around us. And when we perceive things as bad, we don't see how that trait or that person or that thing could actually benefit our lives. So instead of fully integrating the true embodiment of who we are, and therefore by nature, attracting everything that is vibrationally in alignment to our purest truth, we are going to be attracting people and scenarios that match the vibration that we're residing in when we are only being a fraction of who we are. And we'll have to keep attracting things in our reality to help us come into that balance. When if we were to come into balance, we would attract things that reflect that which is in our highest good. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit that like button if you like this video. Subscribe for more content like this. Hit that notification bell if you really love me. And comment any other video ideas you'd like me to do. I also have a Patreon page. The link is in the description, or you can just go to patreon.com/DannyFox with 2 X's. I'm also posting videos on my Patreon every week. So if you just can't get enough of me, or if you want discounts on booking sessions with me, I highly suggest checking out my Patreon page. I am so excited to develop a closer relationship with you guys. See you, love you, goodbye.